The rain hammered down on Chicago's west side like bullets from heaven, each drop a small violence against the cracked pavement. Lexi Carter hunched deeper into her threadbare jacket, her worn sneakers squelching through puddles that reflected the sickly amber glow of street lamps and the neon bleeding from corner liquor stores. 27 years old, and she'd already learned the most important lesson life had to teach. The world didn't deal in fairness. It dealt in survival, and barely. The eviction notice in her canvas bag felt like it had its own gravity. 14 days to vacate, pulling at her shoulder with every step. 14 days to find first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, and somehow keep eating in between. She had $120 in her checking account, and another shift at Miller's Diner wouldn't even cover groceries. The math was simple and brutal. She was going under, and there wasn't a life raft in sight. Her breath formed ghosts in the freezing November air as she trudged past shuttered warehouses and chain-link fences tagged with territorial warnings. This neighborhood belonged to people who'd perfected the art of not seeing, not hearing, not getting involved. Lexi had learned that art too. Keep your head down, mind your business, make it home alive, repeat tomorrow. She almost missed it under the symphony of traffic and storm drains, gurgling with runoff, a sound that didn't belong. A child's cry, raw and animal, the kind of sound that comes from a throat too young to have learned how to suffer quietly. Lexi stopped. Her sneakers ceased their splashing. The rain continued its assault, plastering her dark hair to her face, but she'd gone still as a deer sensing predators. There, huddled against a brick wall beside an alley entrance, barely visible in the shadow between streetlights, was a little boy. 6 years old, maybe younger. His dark hair hung in soaked ropes across his forehead. His thin t-shirt and jeans clung to his small frame like a second skin, completely drenched, offering zero protection against the cold. No coat, no adult, just a child, alone, shaking so violently his teeth chattered, loud enough to hear from 5 feet away. His lips had gone the blue-gray color of hypothermia. Every instinct Lexi had honed over 27 years of hard living screamed at her to keep walking. This was West Side Chicago, where people who asked the wrong questions disappeared into the Chicago River, where getting involved in someone else's business was a quick way to become a cautionary tale. She had her own problems, a mountain of them, and picking up someone else's was a luxury she absolutely could not afford. But as she stared at that small body trembling against the cold brick, something cracked open inside her chest. She saw herself at 8 years old, standing outside Rosie's Liquor on 52nd Street, watching the sun go down while she waited for a father who'd gone inside. Just for a minute, 3 hours earlier. She remembered the cold, the fear, the slow, crushing realization that she'd been forgotten, that she wasn't worth remembering. Some wounds never healed. They just taught you to recognize the same pain in someone else. "Hey there," Lexi heard herself say, her voice gentler than she'd known she could make it. She knelt beside him, ignoring the cold water soaking through her jeans. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The boy's head snapped up. His eyes were the color of storm clouds over Lake Michigan. Gray and turbulent and far too old for his young face. They held fear, yes, but also something else. A wariness that made Lexi's stomach turn. Children shouldn't know how to look at strangers like they might be the next person to hurt them. "Rory," he whispered through chattering teeth. His small hands were fisted in his wet shirt, knuckles white. "I'm waiting for Papa. He said someone would come get me." "How long have you been out here, Rory?" His chin trembled. "I don't know. It was still light when they told me to wait right here, that someone would come." His voice cracked on the last word. But nobody came. Hours. This child had been abandoned in a freezing rainstorm for hours. Something hot and furious ignited in Lexi's chest, burning away the numbness she'd wrapped around herself like armor. What kind of monster left a 6-year-old exposed to the elements? What kind of person could forget a child? Without thinking, without letting herself think, Lexi shrugged out of her denim jacket. It was the only decent coat she owned, the one she'd saved up 3 paychecks to buy from the Salvation Army. The cold bit into her immediately, knifing through her thin, long-sleeved shirt, but she wrapped the jacket around Rory's small shoulders and pulled him against her side. "Okay, honey, I've got you now. You're not alone anymore. Rory pressed into her warmth like he was trying to crawl inside her bones. His small body shook against hers, and Lexi rubbed his arm through the jacket, trying to generate heat, trying to undo hours of cold in seconds. "Tell me about Papa," she said, pulling out her phone with numb fingers. The screen was cracked, water droplets scattering across it like diamonds. She should call 911. That was the right thing to do. The responsible thing. "He's really tall," Rory said, his voice small but steadying. "And he has pictures on his neck. He says they're from before I was born, when he was different. Tattoos. Tall. Wealthy enough for expensive clothes, but careless enough to lose his kid." The combination sent warning signals firing through Lexi's brain. "Does Papa have a name?" But before Rory could answer, a sound cut through the rain. Low, powerful, expensive. The rumble of engines that cost more than most people's annual salary. Lexi's head snapped toward the street. 3 black SUVs materialized from the rain-darkened street like sharks rising from deep water. They moved with frightening precision, coordinated and deliberate, boxing in the alley entrance with military efficiency. No hesitation, no wasted movement. These weren't lost drivers or late-night commuters. This was a hunting party. Car doors opened in near-perfect synchronization. Men emerged, 5, 6, 7 of them, dressed in dark suits that even in the rain looked expensive and precisely tailored. But these weren't corporate types or lawyers. The way they moved marked them as something else entirely. Soldiers. Enforcers. The kind of men who made problems disappear. Each one scanned the environment with professional alertness, hands hovering near their sides where Lexi knew weapons would be concealed. Their eyes swept the alley, the street, the shadows, threat assessment happening in real time. Lexi's pulse kicked into overdrive. She'd stumbled into something bad. Then the rear door of the center SUV opened, and the air itself seemed to change. He emerged like a king stepping onto conquered territory, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to question whether people would obey. His dark hair was slicked back from his face, rain droplets sliding off like even the weather knew better than to inconvenience him. His white shirt was crisp despite the storm, open at the collar to reveal the dark ink of tattoos creeping up his neck. His suit probably cost more than 6 months of Lexi's rent, but it wasn't the clothes or the height or even the obvious wealth that made Lexi's survival instincts start screaming. It was the way he carried violence in his very bones, the way power radiated from him like heat from pavement in summer. This was a man who'd built an empire on the broken backs of anyone stupid enough to get in his way. A man who commanded fear like other men commanded respect. His eyes, the exact same storm gray as Rory's, locked onto the scene before him with predatory intensity. This was a man who destroyed people for far less than touching his son. "Rory." His voice was a low rumble, controlled and quiet, but carrying an undercurrent of barely restrained violence that made the armed men straighten unconsciously. It was the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised. It just needed to be obeyed. "Papa!" Rory scrambled up from Lexi's side, but his small hands clutched at her jacket, refusing to let go entirely. "You came back. The lady, she stayed with me. She gave me her coat when I was cold." The man's gaze shifted from his son to Lexi, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. He took her in with one comprehensive sweep, her soaked shirt plastered to her frame, her protective posture still curved around where Rory had been, her bare arms red with cold, the way his son clung to her jacket like a lifeline. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find. "Who are you?" The question was quiet, but it demanded an answer. Everything about him demanded answers. Lexi stood slowly, fighting to keep her knees steady. She knew enough about Chicago's underworld to recognize apex predators when she saw them, but she'd spent too many years being pushed around by men who thought power gave them permission. Lexi Carter. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I found him alone. He was freezing." She paused, anger overriding self-preservation. "What kind of person leaves a 6-year-old child out here for hours in a storm?" One of the suited men stepped forward, his face darkening with warning, hand moving toward his jacket. But the tattooed man held up one hand, casual, barely a gesture, and the soldier froze. His eyes never left Lexi's face. There was a miscommunication. His tone was controlled, but Lexi heard the threat beneath it, cold and sharp as a blade. Someone was going to pay for this mistake. Someone was going to suffer. "Victor," he said, without looking away from her. We'll discuss this later. One of the men to his left went visibly pale. Yes, sir. The tattooed man moved closer, and Lexi caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with rain and something darker, the metallic tang of power, of violence held in check. He knelt beside Rory, and his entire presence transformed. The predator became something else, something almost gentle. Are you hurt? His hands moved over his son with surprising tenderness, checking for injuries with the careful precision of someone who'd done this before, who'd had reason to fear harm coming to this child. No, Papa. Rory leaned into his father's touch. Lexi told me stories about brave knights who fought dragons. She kept me warm. The man's eyes lifted to meet Lexi's again, and this time there was something calculating in his gaze, something that made her pulse quicken for entirely different reasons. You'll catch pneumonia. It wasn't a question. Before Lexi could respond, he stood and shrugged out of his wool coat in one fluid motion. He draped it around her shoulders with surprising gentleness, his hands lingering just a moment on her arms. The coat was still warm from his body, heavy with expensive fabric and the weight of obligation. It felt less like a gift and more like a chain settling around her neck. I can't, Lexi started. You can. His voice cut through her protest like silk-wrapped steel. You will. He gestured toward the center SUV. Get in the car. Both of you. Every fiber of Lexi's being screamed danger. She knew better. She'd watched enough true crime, heard enough stories. Never get in a car with strangers. Never let powerful men box you in. Never put yourself at the mercy of someone who collected debts like trophies. Men like him didn't offer rides out of kindness. They collected what they were owed. And somehow, in the last 10 minutes, Lexi had ended up owing this dangerous man something precious, his son's safety. But Rory was still holding her hand, his small fingers wrapped around hers, looking up at her with those storm-gray eyes filled with trust. Trust she couldn't bring herself to break. Not after abandoning him once already by considering walking away. Okay, she heard herself whisper. The interior of the SUV was another world entirely. Warm and plush, all soft leather and gleaming technology that probably cost more than Lexi's annual income. Rory climbed in beside her immediately, pressing against her side like he was afraid she might disappear. He chattered about the night stories, his small voice gaining strength as warmth seeped back into his body. The tattooed man folded himself into the seat across from them. His phone buzzed constantly with incoming messages, but he ignored every single one. Instead, his attention remained fixed on Lexi with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. The SUV pulled smoothly into traffic, rain drumming against the roof. Where do you live? He asked. Lexi gave him her address, watching his face carefully for judgment. She saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He knew the neighborhood, knew what kind of desperation landed people there. But when he spoke, his voice held no contempt. And you work? Miller's Diner, Roosevelt Road. The words came out defensive despite her best efforts. Look, I don't want any trouble. I just couldn't leave him alone out there. Why? The simple question hit harder than any accusation. Lexi looked down at Rory, who'd finally stopped shivering, his small body warm against her side. Because I know what it feels like to be forgotten. Something shifted in the man's expression. The mask of control slipped for just a heartbeat, revealing something raw underneath. Recognition, maybe, or understanding that came from a place of shared pain. When they pulled up to her building, a decrepit structure with broken windows patched with cardboard and graffiti tags marking territory, Lexi started to shrug out of the expensive coat. Keep it, he said. Payment for services rendered. I didn't do it for payment. I know. His voice was quieter now, almost thoughtful. The dangerous edge softened into something that might have been respect. That's exactly why you should keep it. As Lexi reached for the door handle, Rory's small voice stopped her. Will I see you again, Lexi? She looked back at the boy, then at his father. The man's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a promise that made her pulse quicken. Not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Perhaps, he said, though he was looking at Lexi, not his son, if she's willing. As the SUV pulled away, Lexi stood on the broken sidewalk, wrapped in a coat that cost more than 3 months of her rent. The rain continued to fall. Her building loomed behind her, a monument to all her failures. The eviction notice still waited in her bag, but something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed, and Lexi couldn't shake the feeling that she just made either the best or the absolute worst decision of her life. Welcome to Fated Mate Tales, where one act of kindness can change everything. If this story already has your heart racing, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps me bring you more intense romance stories that will keep you up all night. Now, let's see what happens when a struggling woman becomes entangled with Chicago's most dangerous man. 3 days passed before Lexi saw them again. 3 days of the expensive wool coat hanging in her closet like an accusation, like evidence of a crime she hadn't meant to commit. She tried to ignore it, but the charcoal fabric seemed to mock her threadbare wardrobe every time she opened the door. It smelled like expensive cologne and danger and choices she couldn't take back. She looked him up, of course. Late at night, when the eviction notice kept her awake, she typed variations of Jensen Ruiz, Chicago into her cracked phone screen. The results were carefully curated. Successful businessman, shipping and logistics, real estate development, philanthropic donations to children's hospitals. The kind of portfolio that screamed legitimacy. But Lexi had grown up on these streets. She knew how to read it between the lines. The comments sections told a different story, the ones people deleted quickly or posted anonymously. People spoke his name in whispers, if they spoke it at all. Jensen Ruiz wasn't just wealthy, he was untouchable. The kind of man who owned politicians and judges, who made problems disappear into the Chicago River, who built his empire on the broken bones of anyone stupid enough to challenge him. And she challenged him, called him out for abandoning his son, looked him in those storm gray eyes and demanded answers. Lexi's hand shook slightly as she poured coffee for the morning rush at Miller's Diner, the memory making her stomach clench. She should have kept her mouth shut, should have handed Rory over and walked away, should have returned the coat by now, cut whatever invisible thread connected her to Jensen Ruiz's dangerous world. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed. Lexi looked up from the coffee pot and froze. Rory stood just inside the doorway, his small face breaking into a grin that made her heart twist painfully. "Harper," he spotted her and started forward. "Papa, it's Lexi. I told you this was her restaurant." Then Jensen appeared behind his son and every conversation in the diner died. He looked impossibly out of place among the cracked vinyl booths and laminate tables. Tall and commanding in a black suit that probably cost more than the diner's monthly rent. His presence seemed to suck the air from the room. Lexi noticed how the other customers suddenly found their phones fascinating. How her coworker Maria disappeared into the kitchen without being asked. People knew. Even if they didn't know his name, they recognized power when it walked. Through the door, Rory climbed onto a stool at the counter, swinging his legs happily. "We came to check on you. Papa said you might be sick from being in the rain." His gray eyes were bright with uncomplicated joy. "Are you sick?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." Lexi's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Just working." Jensen settled onto the stool beside his son, and Lexi became acutely aware of how close he was, how the counter was the only barrier between them, how his dark eyes tracked her movements with unnerving focus. "You look tired," he observed. Not criticism, just fact delivered in that low, controlled voice. "Some of us have to work for a living," Lexi replied, then immediately regretted the defensive edge in her tone. But instead of taking offense, Jensen's mouth quirked up in what might have been amusement. "Fair enough." He paused, his gaze never leaving her face. "What time do you get off?" "Why?" "Because Rory hasn't stopped talking about you for 3 days. Something shifted in his expression, became almost human. "And I'm running out of ways to explain why the nice lady from the rain can't come tell him more stories about dragon-slaying knights." Lexi looked down at Rory, who was watching her with hopeful eyes that reminded her too much of her own reflection at that age. The smart thing would be to say no, to create distance, to return the coat and thank them politely and go back to her safe, small, suffocating life. But when had she ever done the smart thing? "I finish at 6, she heard herself say. "We'll pick you up." It wasn't a question, but Lexi found herself nodding anyway. That evening, as she climbed into the familiar SUV, Lexi tried to tell herself this was just about Rory, just about a lonely little boy who needed someone to care. It had nothing to do with the way Jensen's eyes had lingered on her face, or the unexpected gentleness in his voice when he'd said his son hadn't stopped talking about her. Nothing at all. Rory chattered excitedly during the drive, telling her about his school, his fish named Captain, his favorite video game. Jensen remained mostly silent in the front passenger seat, but Lexi caught him watching her in the rearview mirror. His dark eyes were unreadable, but intense enough to make her skin prickle with awareness. The Ruiz mansion sat on a hill in Lincoln Park. all glass and steel and modern lines that screamed serious money. As they pulled through electronic gates that probably cost more than a year of Lexi's wages, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being completely out of her depth. "It's really big," Rory said, following her gaze. "Sometimes it feels too big, like you could get lost and nobody would find you for days." His voice dropped to something quieter. "That's why Papa got me Captain the Fish. But fish don't really talk back." The loneliness in those words made Lexi's throat tight. Inside, the house was beautiful but cold, all white marble and expensive art and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a home. Rory led her up a sweeping staircase to his bedroom, which was bigger than Lexi's entire apartment and filled with toys that looked barely touched. He settled beside her on his bed with a book of fairy tales, pressing close like he was afraid she might disappear. "Mama used to read to me," he said quietly, his small fingers tracing the book's cover. "But she went to heaven when I was little. Do you think she can still hear the stories from there?" Lexi's heart cracked. "I think Mama's always listened, sweetheart, no matter where they are." As she read about princes and magic kingdoms, Lexi became aware of Jensen in the doorway. He leaned against a frame with his arms crossed, watching them. When she glanced up, their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition of shared loss, maybe, or mutual understanding of what it meant to protect something precious. After Rory fell asleep, Jensen led her downstairs to a kitchen that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. He moved around the space with surprising ease, pulling out coffee beans and setting up an expensive machine. "Drink?" he asked, then seemed to remember. "Coffee, I mean." "You remembered." Lexi wasn't sure why that surprised her. "I remember everything about that night." His voice was quiet but carried weight, including how you gave up your only coat without hesitation. As he worked, Lexi studied him. Without the intimidating presence of armed guards, without the armor of absolute control, he seemed more human. Still dangerous, she could see that in the way he moved, in the tattoos that crept up his neck, in the controlled violence that hummed beneath his skin. But human. "Why did you really bring me here?" she asked. Jensen handed her a steaming mug, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent electricity up her arm. "Because my son smiled for the first time in months when he talked about you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because you gave him your jacket without thinking twice. Because..." He held her gaze. "Because I haven't met many people who do the right thing when nobody's watching." "You don't know anything about me. I know you work doubles to keep your apartment. I know you live in a neighborhood where most people lock their doors and mind their business, but you stopped for a stranger's child." His voice dropped lower. "I know you're stronger than you think you are." Lexi's hands tightened around the mug. "You had me investigated. I protect what matters to me." No apology in his tone. "Rory matters to me." "And what about me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Do I matter to you?" The air between them went electric. Jensen stepped closer, close enough that Lexi could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "You're starting to," he said quietly, "and that terrifies me." 2 weeks slipped by like water through Lexi's fingers, each day bleeding into the next in a rhythm that felt dangerously close to belonging. She'd been to the Ruiz mansion 6 times now. 6 evenings of reading to Rory, of watching his sad gray eyes light up with laughter, of staying for dinner that Jensen insisted she share with them at the massive dining table that seated 12 but only ever held 3. 6 evenings of pretending this was normal, that she belonged in a world of heated marble floors and wine that cost more than her monthly rent. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, Lexi helping Rory with his homework while Jensen worked in his study, that her carefully constructed bubble finally burst. Rory had asked for a specific book, something about pirates that he swore was in his father's office. Lexi had gone looking, trying not to feel like an intruder in the wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and expensive scotch. The book wasn't on the obvious shelves, so she checked the desk, careful not to disturb the neat stacks of paperwork. That's when she saw her name. The document was partially hidden under a leather portfolio, but Lexi Carter jumped out at her like a neon sign. Her hands moved before her brain could stop them, pulling the paper free. It was a financial report, detailed, thorough, invasive, her work history at Miller's Diner, her previous 3 jobs before that. Her checking account balance, $143.67 as of last Tuesday. The eviction notice documented with ruthless efficiency. Medical bills from an ER visit 8 months ago that she'd been paying off at $50 a month. Her father's death certificate from liver failure 3 years prior. But it didn't stop there. Clipped behind her file was another document. A purchase agreement dated 5 days after she'd met Jensen in the rain. The property address made her stomach drop. Her apartment building. Jensen hadn't just looked into her situation. He'd bought the entire structure, paid off the slumlord who'd owned it, halted all pending evictions, and according to the notes in the margin, planned to renovate it into affordable housing. Her hands started shaking as she flipped to the next page. The medical debt collection agency that had been hounding her for months purchased, not just her debt, the entire company. And according to the attached spreadsheet, he'd forgiven every single debt they held. Hundreds of people, their medical bankruptcies erased with the stroke of a pen and a wire transfer that probably didn't even dent his accounts. Looking for something? Lexi spun around. Jensen stood in the doorway, perfectly still, his expression unreadable. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw had gone tight. He knew exactly what she'd found. You bought it. Her voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. You bought all of it. Jensen stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that felt ominous. Lexi. The building. The debt company. How much did you buy, Jensen? How much of my life do you own now? It's not like that, isn't it? The papers slipped from her fingers, scattering across his expensive rug like evidence at a crime scene. You saw a broken woman with problems you could solve and you just... what? Decided to play God? Write a few checks and make it all go away? I helped you. His voice remained controlled, but she heard the edge creeping in. You controlled me? The words exploded out of her, carrying 2 weeks of growing unease, years of being at the mercy of men who thought they knew better. Just like every other powerful man who's decided what's best for me without bothering to ask what I actually want. Jensen's face went pale. This is different. Is it? Lexi heard her voice rising but couldn't stop it. Didn't want to stop it. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same. You saw something you wanted and you took it. You just used money instead of force, which I guess makes you feel like the good guy. I am nothing like my father. The comparison hit its target. She saw it in the way Jensen flinched, in the way his hands clenched at his sides. He used to do this too. Make decisions for my mother, tell her it was for her own good, take away every choice until she forgot she'd ever had any. Until the only choice she could make was which bottle to empty first. The silence that followed felt like broken glass, sharp and dangerous. Your father, Jensen said quietly, each word precisely controlled, was an abusive drunk who destroyed everyone around him. I looked into him too, Lexi. I know what he did to you, to your mother. Don't you dare compare me to that man. Why not? You both think money gives you the right to decide what's best for other people. I was trying to help. I didn't ask for your help. Lexi's voice cracked. I didn't ask you to investigate me, to buy my problems, to make me dependent on you. You want to know what terrifies me, Jensen? Not poverty, not eviction, not even working myself to death. What terrifies me is becoming someone who needs you so much that I forget who I am without you. She pushed past him toward the door, but his voice stopped her cold. And Rory? 2 words. Quiet. Devastating. Lexi's hand froze on the doorknob. Don't. Don't what? Don't point out that there's a 6-year-old boy upstairs who's finally sleeping through the night? Who draws pictures of the 3 of us as a family? Who told me yesterday that he wants you to be his new mama? Jensen's voice was rough now, stripped of its usual control. You want to walk away? Fine, but don't pretend it's just about you and me. Lexi closed her eyes, tears burning hot down her cheeks. She thought of Rory that morning, showing her his drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house. That's you and me? And Papa, he'd said with such pure hope it had made her heart ache. We're a family now, right? That's not fair, she whispered. No, Jensen agreed. It's not. But I'm asking anyway. What are you going to tell him when you disappear without explanation? When he wakes up tomorrow and you're gone and he has to learn all over again that people he loves don't stay? The words landed like physical blows. Lexi sagged against the door, her anger collapsing into something more complicated, more painful. I hate you, she said, but it came out broken, defeated. I know. Jensen's voice was closer now, but he didn't touch her. But that doesn't change the fact that we both love him. And he loves you. Lexi stood there, torn between the desperate need to run and the knowledge that leaving would destroy a child who'd already lost too much. The eviction notice didn't matter anymore. Jensen had made sure of that. Her medical debt was gone. Her apartment secure. He'd systematically removed every obstacle that would have forced her to leave. And she couldn't tell if that made him her savior or her captor. "I need time," she said finally, her voice raw. "I need to think." "Take all the time you need." Jensen paused. "But Lexi?" She looked back at him, this dangerous man who'd bought her building and saved her life and might be slowly stealing her soul. "Whatever you decide about us," he said quietly, "don't punish him for my mistakes." That night, alone in her room in the guest wing, Lexi stared at her 3-year sobriety chip. The physical craving for alcohol hadn't hit her this hard since her first year clean. The stress, the betrayal, the crushing weight of impossible choices, it all pressed down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. She could walk downstairs. Jensen kept expensive liquor in the kitchen. Just one drink to quiet the screaming in her head. Just enough to make the pain manageable. Instead, her shaking fingers found her phone, found her sponsor's number. "Sarah?" Her voice cracked. "I need help. I'm about to do something really stupid, and I need someone to talk me down." As she poured out everything, Jensen, Rory, the investigation, the crushing feeling of being trapped, something crystallized in her mind. The man who'd bought her building wasn't the same man who knelt in the rain beside his son, who'd taken off his coat without hesitation, who'd learned she didn't drink and never offered her alcohol again. But that didn't make what he'd done right, and it didn't solve the fundamental problem. Lexi had spent her entire adult life fighting to be independent, to never again be at the mercy of someone else's choices. Now she was more dependent than ever, and the man she was falling in love with held all the cards. The question was whether love was worth the risk of losing herself completely. And staring at her sobriety chip in the darkness, Lexi still didn't know the answer. The final eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Lexi's door like a death sentence typed in 12-point font. 48 hours to vacate the premises, 2 days to pack up her life and find somewhere, anywhere, to go. Lexi sat on her worn couch, staring at the paper until the words blurred together. She'd been juggling 3 part-time jobs for weeks now. Miller's Diner, overnight stocking at a convenience store, weekend cleaning shifts at an office building, sleeping 4 hours a night, running on coffee in desperation, trying to outpace the inevitable. It hadn't been enough. It was never going to be enough. The medical bill sat beside the eviction notice like a companion piece in her personal apocalypse. $8,500 for an ER visit 8 months ago when she'd had pneumonia so bad she couldn't breathe. The collection agency had been patient until now, but patience had an expiration date. Final notice. Legal action pending. Wage garnishment imminent. Lexi did the math in her head for the 100th time, even though she knew the answer. Knew it was impossible. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, moving costs, the medical bill. She'd need at least $15,000 to dig herself out. She had $372 to her name. She found herself standing outside Rosie's Liquor on 52nd Street as dusk painted the sky purple and gold. The neon signs buzzed in the window. Beer brands she'd sworn she'd never touch again. Whiskey bottles that used to feel like the only friend who understood. 3 years sober, 1,095 days of fighting the craving, proving she was stronger than her father's genes, better than the Carter family curse that turned pain into alcoholism with mechanical precision. But standing there, staring at those neon signs, Lexi felt the old hunger clawing up her throat. Just one drink. Just enough to make her hands stop shaking, to quiet the screaming voice in her head that said she'd failed. She was worthless. She'd end up just like her father after all. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The text was from Jensen. "Rory wants to know if you're coming for dinner tonight. He's been practicing his dragon voice all afternoon. Fair warning. It's very loud and slightly terrifying." The message was so unexpectedly normal, so gentle, that something cracked in Lexi's chest. She thought of Rory calling her Lexi the Brave after she'd told him stories about fearless nights, thought of his laugh, his trust, the way he'd started sleeping with his light off because he said brave people weren't afraid of the dark. Lexi turned away from the liquor store and headed for the bus stop. At dinner, she was quieter than usual. Rory noticed immediately, the way children always do when the adults in their lives are bleeding internally. "Are you sad, Lexi?" He set down his fork, his gray eyes too perceptive for 6 years old. "Your smile looks wrong, like you're wearing someone else's face." Just Tired, sweetheart. The lie tasted bitter, but Jensen's gaze was sharper, more knowing. After Rory went to bed, after stories about dragons and one more, hug that lasted too long, Jensen found her on the terrace. The Chicago skyline glittered before them, a million lights representing a million lives that probably weren't falling apart. What's wrong? He didn't crowd her, just stood beside her at the railing. Patient, solid, like he'd wait all night if that's what she needed. Lexi almost said nothing, almost smiled and deflected like she'd been doing her entire life. But something about the way Jensen waited, not pushing, not demanding, just present. It broke something loose inside her. I got my final eviction notice today. The words came out flat, exhausted. 48 hours. And the collection agency for my medical bills is threatening to sue. $8,500 that I don't have and will never have. She laughed, and it sounded broken even to her own ears. I can't even keep a roof over my head. Some role model I am for your son. Jensen was quiet for a long moment, and Lexi braced herself for pity, for the kind of sympathy that always felt like humiliation wearing a different mask. How much do you need? He asked instead. It doesn't matter. How much, Lexi? 8,500 plus probably another 6,000 to move somewhere new. But I'm not. She turned to face him, fierce despite the tears threatening to spill over. I'm not telling you this because I want your money. I just needed to tell someone. I needed to say it out loud before I... She stopped herself, but Jensen's eyes narrowed. Before you what? The concern in his voice made her throat tight. Nothing. I handled it. The liquor store on 52nd? His voice was gentle, not accusatory. Victor mentioned seeing you there on his route. Of course he had people watching her. Of course he knew. Lexi should have been angry, but she was too tired. I didn't go in, she whispered. I know. Jensen stepped closer, and Lexi could feel the warmth of him, solid and real. Because you're stronger than you think you are. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm drowning. What if I could help? Lexi's spine stiffened. I won't be your charity case. What if it wasn't charity? Jensen's voice dropped lower, more careful. What if it was a job? What kind of job? Suspicion crept into her tone despite herself. Rory needs someone. Not just a babysitter, but someone who genuinely cares about him. Someone he trusts. Jensen paused, seeming to choose his words with unusual care. Move in here. Take care of him. Be part of his life. I'll handle your debts, provide a salary that's more than comfortable, you'd have your own space, your independence. Lexi stared at him. You want me to live here. I want you to be part of his life. Jensen stopped, corrected himself. Part of our lives. It was too good to be true, and Lexi had learned that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually came with a price tag she couldn't afford to pay. What's the real price? She asked quietly. What do you actually want from me? Jensen moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel his breath warm against her face. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with surprising gentleness. There's no price, he said, his voice rough with honesty. I'm asking because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't know how to do this any other way. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Lexi's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jensen, his thumb traced her cheekbone, and the tenderness of it made her eyes burn. I'm not good at this, she whispered. Love, relationships, letting people in. I break things. So do I. His forehead touched hers, and Lexi felt the words more than heard them. But maybe we can figure it out together. Maybe broken things can still fit. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, almost questioning. But when Lexi kissed him back, something ignited between them. All the tension and attraction that had been building for weeks finally found its outlet. Jensen's hands tangled in her hair as Lexi pressed closer, her fingers clutching his shirt like he might disappear if she let go. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads still touching, existing in the same breath. Stay, Jensen whispered against her lips. Not just for Rory, for me. Lexi closed her eyes, feeling herself falling into something that might save her or destroy her or both at once. Okay. The next morning, packing her few belongings into boxes, Lexi found her 3-year sobriety token on her nightstand. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight. 3 years of fighting every day to stay clean, to prove she was more than her father's daughter, more than the sum of her worst moments. Now she was moving into the home of a man whose world was built on violence and control. A man who could solve her problems with a phone call and a check. A man who made her feel things she'd never felt before, but who also represented everything dangerous about letting someone else have power over her life. Lexi slipped the token into her pocket and finished packing. She was about to find out if love was worth the risk of losing herself all over again. 6 weeks of living in Jensen's world, and Lexi still wasn't sure if she'd found a home or walked into a gilded cage. She had her own room in the guest wing, more space than she'd ever had in her life, with a bathroom bigger than her old apartment's entire kitchen. But most nights she fell asleep in Rory's room, curled up in the reading chair after he drifted off mid-story, her hand still holding his. The transformation in the boy was remarkable. He laughed now, easily, often, the kind of unself-conscious joy that children should always have but so many lose too early. His nightmares had faded. The wariness in his gray eyes had softened into trust. He drew pictures constantly, always the same 3 figures, Papa, Lexi, and himself, holding hands in front of their house. "We're a family," he told her just that morning, matter of fact, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe Lexi had finally found the belonging she'd spent 27 years searching for. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when everything shattered. Rory had mentioned a book about pirates, something with a red cover that he swore was in his father's study. Jensen was out handling business he never quite explained. The kind that made men in expensive suits arrive at odd hours and leave looking nervous. Lexi had learned not to ask questions. The study smelled like leather and expensive scotch, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that probably cost more than most people's cars. The red book wasn't on the obvious shelves, so Lexi checked the desk, trying to be careful, trying not to invade Jensen's privacy more than necessary. That's when her elbow caught the edge of a leather portfolio. Papers scattered across the mahogany surface like autumn leaves, and Lexi bent to gather them with muttered apologies to the empty room. Then she saw her name. The document was a payment receipt from Midwest Medical Collections. But it wasn't for $8,500. It was for $2.3 million, the purchase price of the entire collection agency. Attached was a spreadsheet listing hundreds of names, hundreds of debts, all marked forgiven in clinical red letters. Her debt was just one line item among many. Lexi's hand started trembling as she pulled another paper free. A deed. Her old apartment building on Roosevelt Road. Purchase date. 3 days after their conversation on the terrace. 3 days after she'd poured her heart out about drowning in debt. But there was more. Underneath the deed was a background investigation report dated 2 weeks before that conversation. Before she told him anything, a comprehensive dossier on Lexi Carter. Employment history, financial records, medical bills, even her father's death certificate and the police reports from the domestic disturbances at their old house. He'd known everything before she'd said a word. The job offer hadn't been spontaneous. It had been calculated, planned. Looking for something? Lexi spun around, papers falling from her numb fingers. Jensen stood in the doorway, perfectly still, his face carefully neutral, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw had gone tight. He knew exactly what she'd found. "You bought it all." Her voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. "The debt company, my building, you knew everything before I told you. Before that night on the terrace when I thought..." She couldn't finish, couldn't articulate the betrayal cutting through her chest like a blade. Jensen stepped into the room, closing the door with ominous quiet. "Lexi, it's not what I think." Something hot and furious was rising in her chest, burning away the shock. "You investigated me, bought up my problems like you were shopping for groceries, then you sat there on that terrace and let me pour my heart out like you were hearing it for the first time. Like you actually gave a damn about what I wanted." "I do give a damn." "You wanted control." The words exploded out of her. "You saw a broken woman with problems you could solve and you just... what? Decided to play God? Write some checks and make me yours?" "I helped you." Jensen's voice remained controlled, but there was an edge creeping in now. "You bought me." Lexi was shaking now, years of suppressed rage finally finding a target. "Just like every other powerful man who's decided what's best for me without bothering to ask. My father used to do this. Make all the decisions, control all the money, tell my mother it was for her own good until she couldn't breathe without his permission." Jensen's face went pale. "I am nothing like your father." "Aren't you?" The comparison tasted like poison on her tongue, but she couldn't stop. You're both men who use power to get what you want from women who have no other choice. You just use money instead of violence, which I guess makes you feel like the hero of this story. You've always had a choice. Lexi laughed, bitter and broken. What choice, Jensen? Let my debts destroy me or become your kept woman? That's not a choice. That's an ultimatum wrapped in expensive paper. She pushed past him toward the door, but his voice stopped her cold. Where are you going? Away from here. Away from you. Her hand was on the doorknob, but she couldn't seem to turn it. I won't be owned. Not by you, not by anyone. And Rory, 2 words. Quiet. Devastating. Lexi's composure shattered. Don't. Don't you dare use him against me. I'm not using him. Jensen's voice was rough now, stripped of its usual control. I'm asking what you're going to tell a 6-year-old boy who drew you into every picture he makes, who sleeps without nightmares now because he trusts you'll be there when he wakes up, who told me yesterday he wishes you were his real mom. The image of Rory's drawing that morning flashed through her mind. 3 stick figures holding hands, the word family written in his careful letters across the top. That's not fair, she whispered. No, Jensen agreed. It's not, but I'm asking anyway. What happens to him when the woman he loves disappears without explanation? When he has to learn all over again that people leave? Lexi sagged against the door, tears streaming down her face. I hate you. I know. His voice was closer now, but he didn't touch her. But that doesn't change the fact that we both love him. And he loves you. She stood there frozen, torn between the desperate need to run and the knowledge that leaving would destroy an innocent child who'd already lost too much. Jensen had systematically removed every obstacle that would have forced her away, and she couldn't tell if that made him her savior or her prison warden. I need time, she said, finally, her voice raw. I need to think. Take all the time you need. Jensen paused. But Lexi, whatever you decide about us, don't punish him for my mistakes. That night, alone in her room, Lexi held her 3-year sobriety token so tightly it left imprints in her palm. The craving was back, vicious and demanding. Just one drink to quiet the noise, just enough to make the pain stop screaming. Her feet carried her halfway down the stairs before she caught herself, before she pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called the number she hadn't dialed in weeks. Sarah? Her voice cracked. I need help. I'm about to do something really stupid. As she poured out everything to her sponsor, sitting on those coal marble stairs at 2 a.m., something became clear. The man who'd bought her debts wasn't the same man who'd knelt beside his son in the rain, who'd given up his coat without hesitation, who'd learned she didn't drink and never offered her alcohol again, who made coffee with surprising care and read bedtime stories with genuine tenderness. But that didn't make what he'd done right. Lexi had spent her entire adult life fighting for independence, for autonomy, for the right to make her own choices, even bad ones. Now she was more dependent than ever, and the man she was falling in love with held all the cards. Could she forgive him? Could she trust him again while still maintaining her sense of self? She didn't know. The next 2 weeks passed in excruciating politeness. Lexi stayed for Rory, she told herself, only for Rory. But she and Jensen moved around each other like strangers at a funeral. Careful, distant. The electricity between them now felt dangerous rather than thrilling. Rory noticed, of course. Children always did. Are you mad at Papa? He asked one afternoon, his gray eyes too perceptive. It's complicated, sweetheart. But you still love him, right? The question made her chest ache. Why would you think that? Because you look at him the way Mama used to look at him in the pictures, like he's the best thing and the scariest thing at the same time. Out of the mouths of babes. That night, watching Rory sleep, Lexi made a decision. Protecting this child mattered more than her pride, but protecting herself mattered too. Tomorrow, she would demand real answers. Tomorrow, she would set boundaries. Real ones. Ones that gave her back her autonomy. Tomorrow, she would decide if Jensen Ruiz deserved a second chance, or if some betrayals, no matter how well-intentioned, were simply unforgivable. She was done being rescued. It was time to rescue herself. This is where our story pauses, but the journey is far from over. Will Lexi find the courage to forgive? Can Jensen prove he sees her as an equal, not someone to save? And what happens when enemies from Jensen's dangerous past discover his greatest weakness? Subscribe and hit that notification bell to find out what happens next in this intense romance. comment below Team Jensen or Team Lexi. Your voice matters. Until next time, remember, the greatest love stories are the ones where we learn to save ourselves.